Kevin, my friend, it is a pleasure to have you back on, but it might not be a pleasure for some LA Galaxy fans because it feels like the bad news just keeps piling on. It was yesterday, January the 2nd. Sorry, I'm still in last year here. Riqui Puig was announced that he had re-torn his ACL and is going to be out for the 2026 season after he just missed the 2025 season. What's your instant reaction when you heard that news?
It's devastating. It's crushing for the Galaxy because their whole offseason was set up over Riqui coming back. We'll talk in a little bit about what they did last season when they knew they weren't going to have him. But they filmed a multi-part documentary, Riqui Puig, The Road to Return, or The Road to Recovery, I think it was called. The Galaxy were hyping it in their season ticket sales. Riqui coming back, their whole offseason strategy, the players they signed, the players they let go when they had to make their roster decision, was all based on Riqui coming back. He may be the closest thing. People talk about Messi and how important he is to Miami, but Miami is a pretty deep team. I think Riqui Puig may be the closest thing MLS has to an irreplaceable player. And all you got to do is go back and look at 2024. The Galaxy win 19 games, the tie a franchise record, win their 6th MLS Cup. He leads the league in touches and passes. 4 players in the Galaxy, including Riqui Puig, score in double figures. Never happened in MLS before. That's all with Riqui on the field. 2025, Ricky's out for the season. The Galaxy start the season with 16 winless games. They go winless their first 16 games. Don't make the playoffs. Finish with the lowest win total, 7 in franchise history. That's without Riqui. So the comparison is, the before and after is pretty stark.
Yeah, and there's so much to dissect with this, Kevin, just because, hey, if you're enjoying the video, make sure you give it a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Guys, we are getting closer and closer to 12,000 subscribers. And with your help, I know we will reach that goal. So make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and hit that little bell notification so you never miss any of our videos. Now, back to the video. When you think about it, it really is a nightmare. He is very important. The entire Galaxy, the ball went through him in 2024 and 2023. Like, he is the ignition for this team, right? I was just thinking of like how unfortunate it is because Riqui got hurt in the Seattle Sounders Western Conference final game in 2024. He tore his ACL. He played how many minutes did he end up playing? Was it like 30 minutes on a torn ACL?
He played the final 30 minutes and assisted on the only goal of the game in the 85th minute on a torn ACL. He knew he was hurt. He didn't know how bad, obviously, but he knew he was hurt. He kept playing, assisted on the winning goal. And then the Galaxy go on and win the MLS Cup without him. Gaston Bergman, who took his place, wound up being the MLS MVP. And maybe it says something there too, the fact that without Ricky's substitute wins MVP of the MLS Cup final, just how important the midfield and that position that Riqui plays is to the way the Galaxy, have structured their offense.
No, 100%. And it's just really hard to even think about this, that he hasn't played a game for the Galaxy since November of 2024. We're what, 14 months since he played almost 14 months since he played his last match with the LA Galaxy. And as far as I know, we talked about this in April. I want to say it was April when they went on we were talking about this before the show, 11-game winless streak at the time. The plan was for him to come back in 2025 at some point, right? We just didn't know when.
Well, there were kind of a lot of plans, and that's why this season is different. The coming season, 2026, is going to be different than 2025. They went into 2020. They knew Riqui was hurt, obviously after the MLS Cup. They knew that he had already undergone surgery at that point. The sort of back of the envelope figure, for a return from that kind of injury is 9 months. Could be longer, could be less, but it's about 9 months. So they knew they might get him back at the end of the season, August, September, maybe in time for Leagues Cup, maybe in time for the playoff run. That was their plan. And that's what they banked on. And they let Mark Delgado go. A guy who easily, with his passing skills, probably could have stepped in and replaced Riqui. They let Bergman go. He left the team as well. So they let the 2 most likely replacements for Riqui go, figuring that Riqui would be back at some time. What they hoped to do was to use Marco Reus to fill in for Riqui. Marco Reus is, he'd been around a long time, the German national team star, a little up in there as far as age goes. he got injured himself early, not a serious injury, but enough where he couldn't play early in last season. And he played really well when he was on the field, but he just wasn't on the field enough. So that idea of replacing Riqui with Marco Royce, that was that didn't work from the very start, as we mentioned, 16 game winless streak. So by the time Riqui was ready to return to training, which was I think in October, the Galaxy were like, look, we're not going to the playoffs. We're not going anywhere. Leagues Cup is gone. We don't want to, what's the upside of putting him on the field just to get to have a look at him? We're going to shut him down for the rest of the season. We're not going to play him. We're going to allow him to keep rehabbing, and we'll go into next season and we'll have a healthy Riqui back. Well, he went home to Barcelona. He was after the injury, he went back to Barcelona where he's from for a little while, came back, rehabbed in LA, did some training with the team or alongside the team in LA, went back to Barcelona for the holidays and went to see a very well-known orthopedic surgeon there. And the orthopedic surgeon told him apparently on the 2nd, as you mentioned, January 2nd, that, look, you need another surgery. I need some more answers about what happened, because he had been, as you said, rehabbing for 14 months. Didn't seem to be reporting any problems. Everything seemed to be, go ahead. Everything was fine. Ricky's been posting a lot on Instagram, things like, I never left, I'm coming back, but I never left. And I'm stronger than ever. That doesn't sound like a guy who felt some twinges in his knee along the way and wanted to get some answers. I'm wondering if something happened over in Barcelona, whether it was on the field training. I know he went back to train at the Barcelona Academy, whether something happened during training, whether something happened away from the field, but it sure seems like another injury happened. And I say that because, people will think, well, that's obvious, another injury happened, but not necessarily. If you look here in LA, we have Christian Press, who played for Angel City in the NWSL, two-time World Cup champion. She tore her ACL 8 games into her first season with Angel City. She needed 3 additional surgeries after the first one. She missed 2.5 years. She only started 3 games after that first season because the knee just wasn't healing correctly, and she had to go in for additional surgeries. So it is possible that Riqui needed an additional surgery. The first one didn't take, but Christian Press knew pretty early on, each time she came out of surgery, like, this just wasn't feeling right. Riqui seemed like it was all full steam ahead. Everything was fine. And then he comes up with this other injury, and the Galaxy came out today, the 3rd. We're recording on the 3rd. The Galaxy came out on the 3rd and said, Riqui had the surgery. He is out for all of 2026. We're not even going to mess around. We're not going to wait for a second opinion. He is out. We're moving forward without him.
Yeah, that's just so weird, because to your point about if something was going wrong, the rehabilitation process, you would have thought something would have been known at 4, 5, 6 months. This is 14 months later. So to your point, I think maybe, I don't want to say any funny business happened, but maybe he was playing on a pitch and then did something wrong and retore it. I'm just speculating, right? We obviously have no idea what really happened. Maybe we won't know for a while, but God, this is just such bad luck for the Galaxy because they really needed him. He's a very important piece to the machine. He is the most important piece to the machine, especially because so many people, it seems like, are coaching for their jobs in 2026, Kevin. We got Greg Vanney, who, even though he signed an extension, which we will talk about later, because we didn't talk about that last time we spoke, but I think even he's coaching for his job. Will Kuntz is coaching for his job. And even if they won MLS Cup in 24, each passing year that's further away, it's what have you done for me lately? So
that's exactly what it is. And what have the Galaxy done for us lately? They went 7-18-9 last season. They had a 20-point goal differential. They gave up 66 goals. The 7 wins are the lowest in franchise history. The 18 losses are tied for the most in franchise history. So you have, Greg Vanney in the last 3 seasons missed the playoffs, won the MLS Cup, great season, missed the playoffs, tied a team record for most losses, set a team record for fewest wins. So yeah, he's it very much is, what have you done? Attendance was down something like 17% last season. So the Galaxy need a bounce back season at the gate. On the field, they need to, they're playing in a market now where LAFC is, I think it's fair to say Miami, without even putting Miami aside, just to say over the last 8 seasons or the last 4 seasons, LAFC have been the class of the league, and they're playing in the same market with the Galaxy, and the Galaxy sort of need to, get that mojo back. They had it in 2024, but they certainly lost it last season, and they have some decisions to make. As we talked before we started, they have some decisions to make with his contract and Ricky's contract and what they do with that.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask you is so there is a mechanism when a player's injured where they can put him on a injured reserve list, and they can use, I'm pretty sure, that spot to sign a DP as long as the DP, they have another spot open when the set player returns, or that person's contract expires when said player returns, right? When Riqui Puig. They didn't do that in 2025 because I think, and you probably agree that they were under the impression, like you said, he would be back at some point, and they were just going to roll with it and see what happened with what they had. They probably thought they were better than what they were, even without Riqui Puig, and it just kind of caught them by surprise they were that bad. So that's probably another reason why they didn't sign anybody or weren't prepared. But that's probably not going to be the path they take this year in 26, right, Kevin? They'll probably try to replace him.
Yeah, I think they looked at the fact that, look, we tried to get by, without him last year. We were hoping he would come back for the playoff push. That didn't work. They've said in their release today, they said he will be ready for the start of the 2027 season. So there's not even that, maybe we'll get him for the playoff push. It's like he's done. And I think the wording of that sort of tipped my hand of like, we're not waiting to see how this thing goes. We're moving on right now. I do think they put him on the season-ending injury list that would allow them to sign a new DP. It gives them salary relief. Not that it's that much, because as he's a DP, only part of that salary, he made $5.8 million last year. I think it was 8th or 9th most in the league. He'll make that again next season. The other thing that, before I forget, I wanted to mention is Riqui missed his age 25 season. Now he's going to miss his age 26 season. This is for a guy who thought maybe he could return to Europe, might be able to go back. Certainly had a great 2024, wanted to build on that. Now he misses 2 seasons in what is obviously, for a midfielder, the prime of his career. He's going to get his money. He's going to get paid. That's fine. But I think Riqui would probably give up a lot of that money if he had a chance to get back on the field and prove how good he is to maybe get back to Europe. But yeah, to your point, I think the Galaxy do use some sort of mechanism to add a DP if they can, to take his salary out of the mix so it doesn't count against the cap, and to restructure their team in a different way. This comes about 2.5-3 weeks before they start training camp. They're going to start early this year because they have Leagues Cup, CONCACAF Champions Cup. This is going to be one of the most challenging seasons in MLS history because they're going to have CONCACAF Champions Cup. Then there's going to be a mid-season break for the World Cup. So it's actually sort of 2 seasons, and they're compacted. Depth is going to be a big issue here. And the Galaxy built the team, assuming Riqui was come back. They added a couple of guys on the defensive end. They're looking for a number 9. That's the big missing thing. They were looking for somebody quick and mobile, a young player to whom Riqui could give service. Ricky's not there to give that service anymore. So maybe they need, I think probably their first move is they're going to go out and get a midfielder, a playmaking midfielder. They do have Marco Reus, but they found out last season we can't count on Marco Reus for every game. We need, and with the schedule set up the way it is, we're going to need depth anyway. So, maybe they start the season with Christian Ramirez as their center forward, which is not the blueprint that they wanted. Maybe they have to use that spot now on a midfielder. And you know what? They probably wouldn't have spent the money and signed those 2 defenders if they knew they were going to be without Riqui Puig.
No, I definitely agree with that. And I want to ask one more final question about Riqui Puig, then I want to focus on the remainder of the offseason and the roster building they're trying to do. Obviously, when you're that bad, you're going to have to do some rebuilding. Riqui Puig, you brought up a good point, and this is something I was going to ask you. He did miss arguably the 2, what you would consider best years of your playing career, mentally and physically, 25, 26, right? Or I think he actually would have turned 25 last season. He would have played most of it 24. Either way, probably arguably the prime of your career, right? And Riqui Puig is going to have 1 year left on his deal, Kevin, in 2027. I'm starting to wonder, man. I'm asking myself this question: do the Galaxy just move off of him? Not because Riqui Puig isn't important or he's not a good player. We both know he is, but he's missed 2 years. And how do we know he's going to come back and be the same player? I feel like after you miss 2 whole seasons, it's going to, by the time he plays another match for the LA Galaxy, an official match, he will have missed, I want to say 26 months of soccer with the Galaxy. How do we know he's going to be that same player we saw before the injury? And can they risk doing that? Because like you said, he's making $6 million a year. I don't know if they can risk that.
Well, I don't know how they get out of that contract without paying a lot of money, and I don't know that they want to do that. But all the health concerns are real. Ricky is a guy who runs, a lot, runs probably 8 miles a match. He gets beat up a lot. That's how he got the injury. Teams go after him physically and try to disrupt his game. LAFC, for one, has been very successful of roughing him up and taking him out of games. So he's a guy that needs that left knee to run and to put up with the tackles and the abuse that he's going to take physically. So when he comes back, not only has he gone, 2 years without playing, but I think it's only natural for him to sort of favor that knee and wonder about that knee. And when someone goes in to tackle him from that side, to maybe fade away a little bit. And so you wonder, especially in the first few matches, how good he's going to be. I think the Galaxy probably in their long-term strategy, I mean, they have guys like Gabriel Peck and Joseph Paintsil signed for a few years. I think they look at that and say, okay, our wingers are set. But you're right. Maybe now they start thinking about, what, maybe our midfield isn't set. For Ricky, unless he comes back in 2027, has another incredible year like 2024, do you turn around and say, yeah, we're going to re-sign you for the same amount of money to a multi-term deal? I think I don't know how else to say it. Right now, until he proves differently, he's damaged goods, and it's hard to build the future of your team around a guy that you're not sure what you're going to get when he comes back.
I agree completely. And you and I both know, covering this league a long time, that DP spots are very valuable, and you can't waste them on guys who aren't on the pitch. It's just a death sentence, honestly. Having a DP not play is playing with one hand tied behind your back, or or your legs tied together.
One point on that is it's very interesting because you're absolutely right. The Galaxy last season, in 2024, when they won the MLS Cup, they had Paintsil, Peck. Those guys had some injury problems, and Ricky even missed a few games with yellow card suspension and stuff. But for the most part, their 3 DPs added up to, I think they had like 80 to 85 minutes of the available time, percent of time that they could play. If they played every minute of every game, they played about 85% of the minutes available to them. That was a kind of a record for the Galaxy, going back probably to the Beckham years. When they struggled, Chicharito missed a lot of time with injury. Before that, it was Jonathan Dos Santos was a DP, missed a lot of time with injury, and Giovanni Dos Santos. The Galaxy and then they had Douglas Costa, who missed time as a DP. So the Galaxy don't have a good track record in recent years of getting that 75, 85, 90% of the minutes out of their DPs. When they did it, 2024, they won. Last year, they didn't do it. Before 2024, they didn't do it either. So you're absolutely right. There's a direct correlation between the number of minutes your DPs play and your success on the field.
100%. So that kind of leads us into their offseason, right? So far, I might be missing someone. They've signed, or they traded or bought Jacob Glesnes from the Philadelphia Union. They got that new mechanism where you can buy players now, but I think they just traded for him. Jacob Glesnes from the Philadelphia Union, and then they signed Justin Hack from New York City FC. Listed him as a midfielder, but he was playing center back for New York City FC. I expect him to probably get some minutes at center back as well. But we see what they're trying to do. They saw the goals were leaking, that they weren't, the back line was atrocious last year in 2025. They're trying to solidify the back line. What's your thoughts on what they've done so far? I mean, you kind of hit on this a little earlier. There's still a lot of work to do with this team that was that historically bad, in all of LA Galaxy's history.
Well, after they made their announced their roster decisions early in the fall, I talked to Greg Vanney and asked him about that. And I said, they parted way with Diego Fagundes, and they need that money. What he was owed, about 1.3 million, he got paid last season. They needed that money. They parted with Diego Fagundes, a couple other guys, not huge, building blocks of the team. Diego Fagundes was the biggest one. But my point was going to be that for the most part, they brought everybody back. And so I asked Greg Vanney, you win 7 games, have the worst season in team history, and you bring everybody back. What's the message in that? And he said, this roster that we finished the season with will not be our roster next season. Yes, those guys are signed and they're under contract, but there are going to be a lot of changes. We're going to bring in a lot of new people. It's going to look totally different when we open training camp. And he's been right. They did sign Justin Hack as a free agent. He, as you said, can play as a holding midfielder or center back. He's only started 1 year in MLS, but it was a very good season for him at New York City last year. Played 34 games. I think he was 5th in the league in minutes played by an outfield player. Was one of the most highly sought free agents this season. He's only 24. About him, by the way, it's very interesting. New York City offered a lot more money, and they also offered a much longer deal. The Galaxy were limited in what they could pay him by league rules. He made about 265,000 last year. By league rules, they could only pay him somewhere around in the middle 800,000, around 850,000 because of the rules. He took that. He took the less money and a shorter deal. It's 1 year with an option. Why did he do that? Because he'll be 25 when that contract runs out. The World Cup will be over by then, or will be ending, be a post-World Cup year. And I think he has designs to go to Europe, and I think he wanted to be free to make that decision. We know after the World Cup, a lot of teams, all players retire, move around. There's a lot of movement, a lot of opportunity for a player like him. So I think he wanted to be free to go to Europe if he wanted. And the Galaxy have a sort of handshake agreement with him that if we exercise that option, you're going to get the money you would have got from New York City. So he's in a pretty good situation. He has pretty much, options to go to Europe or to stay here. Jacob Glasnes, as you mentioned, coming off a hernia surgery a couple years ago, former defender of the year with Philadelphia. He comes in as a center back. We'll see where Hack plays. He, as you said, he can't play center back. He can play holding midfielder. The Galaxy have some decisions to make now on the back line because they'll come back with Zonka, who's I think he signed for 600,000. They still have Yoshida, who may not be the force on the field that he was in the MLS Cup season, but is the real leader in the locker room. And without Riqui, they need a leader in the locker room, someone to hold them together. His leadership is invaluable. He's not going to make a lot of money, but he is a center back, a guy who wants to start, who wants to play. He's apparently had some opportunity to go back to Japan and play there and maybe even compete for a spot on the national team. We'll see what happens with him. And then they still have Emilio Garces. So they have 3 starting center backs before they even made those deals. So they're going to have to get rid of 1, maybe, or even 2 of those center backs to create positions on the field because guys like Zonka and guys like Yoshida are not going to be happy on the bench. So to create the positions for Hawk and Glesnes, they're going to have to make some moves, but also to open up that salary because Glesnes is going to make about 1.3. As we mentioned, Hawk's going to be 850,000. That's a lot of money on a back line when you already have a trio of guys that are making over $1 million. So something's going to have to move with that. Something's going to have to be done to make that work out. And I think that was always part of the equation. Now it's even more important because they're going to have to free up some money to get another midfielder.
Yeah, and they changed the rule, I want to say, last year in 2025. Now teams are allotted 2 buyouts instead of the 1. So now Maya Yoshida took a pay cut in 2020. I remember I was talking about this. He took a pay cut in 2025 because he got a longer deal, if I'm not mistaken. He got a 2-year deal. And is he making $800,000 a year, Maya Yoshida?
No, he's making quite a bit less than that. I don't have the figure right in front of me, but it seems to me, I recall it's somewhere around 500,000. He took about a 50% pay cut. His case is really interesting. And we talked, Maya and I talked a lot about this last season. So he plays every game. He's by the time the playoffs were over, he led MLS in minutes played in 2024. He was an older player, came over, became the leader on the field, on and off the field, was the captain, got them to an MLS Cup, and then the Galaxy came back and said, we can't afford you at what we paid you. We're going to sign you to a new contract, but you're going to take a 50% pay cut. Maya was insulted by that, decided to stay, asked for a second year on the contract, wanted a 2-year deal because he didn't want to take his kids have followed him to Germany, to England. I think he might have been in Italy for a time, obviously in Japan. He didn't want to move his kids out of school, and he wanted to be in Los Angeles for the World Cup. He thought he might have some opportunities as a broadcaster during that MLS break, during the World Cup. So there were a lot of reasons he wanted to stay. So he did get a second year in that contract, which now looks good for him because the Galaxy are either going to have to buy him out or pay him if he leaves. The opportunity to go back to Japan is something that's come up recently. I don't know how serious he is about that, but the money's not great for Yoshida, but he has a little bit of clout in that he does have a second year on his contract. If they buy somebody out, I think probably the guy they might try to buy out would be Zonka. He just hasn't really proven to be the player that they thought he might be, and Yoshida is way more valuable, for his leadership. For the Galaxy, ideally, I think that, if one of those guys like Yoshida went back to Japan, asked out of his contract to go back to Japan, I think they'd be happy with that too.
So you mentioned earlier about striker being a huge issue. They obviously had to get rid of Dejan Joveljic because of he wasn't a U22 any longer. He went to Sporting Kansas City. Actually had a pretty decent season. I think he finished with 19 goals for Sporting Kansas City in 2025, and they went the U22 route again. And they brought Matthias Nascimento on loan from Botafogo, if I'm not mistaken, and he was injured or just kind of looked not ready to be the starting striker, in my opinion, at least. And then you talked about Christian Ramirez had some struggles as well. Now, Riqui Puig obviously was missed greatly in 2025, but they really missed that guy up top who could score between those two talented wingers. Is there any chance, Kevin, that we see the Galaxy not use that maybe, that DP spot they'll get the relief from Riqui Puig and not on a midfielder and use it on a striker instead, just because striker is so important in Major League Soccer, especially if you want to win MLS Cups.
Yeah, that definitely it could be part of the plan. Now, they do have those two great wingers, Paintsil and Peck, and part of the problem is those guys are great at flinging crosses into the box. The problem was when Dejan left, and Dejan was great at getting on those. When Dejan left, there's no one there. Christian Ramirez is just not the player he was when he was younger. He is not hugely mobile. He's a big target in the middle, but he's not mobile. And Greg Vanney, and some people took this as maybe a little bit of a dig at the general manager Will Kuntz when he said, Christian Ramirez is not the forward that I want. I want a mobile player. I want an active player. I want a guy that can move around. That's not Christian Ramirez. Will Kuntz brings Christian Ramirez back, and so it seemed like those two guys were on different pages. Before the Riqui Puig injury, I really thought because of the money problems, because they're up against the salary cap again, and with bringing in the two defenders, money got even tighter. I really thought they might go get a young, maybe Latin American player, maybe as a young, one of the young player initiatives, bring in somebody young who would tend to be mobile, fast, able to move around, a guy who might take a little bit less money to come to a team like the Galaxy. And again, they're going to need depth. Christian Ramirez will play a lot, but I don't think he's the ideal guy that Greg Vanney wants for his system. Oh, and by the way, before we get away from the defenders too much, there does seem to be some impetus that perhaps Greg Vanney is going to play with three in the back this year, and then two wingers, of course, going forward, as he did in Toronto. So they may be, with all these center backs coming in, they may be setting themselves up to play three in the back. But you're right. Now that Ricky's not there, if they can sort of open a DP spot, they might use that DP spot to go get a striker. I think they thought last year, like, we can just score from the wings. We don't need anyone in the middle. They tried Royce there. They tried Fagundes. They tried Ramirez. You mentioned Nascimento. His loan with Botafogo is up, and they need to negotiate a new one. I don't know that he showed them enough last season for them to think that this is the guy. So I don't expect my anticipation is he's not going to come back, but we don't know that. Maybe it depends on what other options they have. I mean, Nascimento wasn't the answer, but he's probably better than playing without a forward at all.
No, I definitely agree with that. And he's so young. I think he was like 20 or 21 last year when he was on loan. So I mean, he's obviously still has a lot of room to grow. He's not 27 years old and kind of hit his ceiling. But he was also injured a lot. So that's kind of my hesitation of why they should probably go in a different direction, just to swing elsewhere and see if they can get a hit. But, this DP spot does make things interesting for the LA Galaxy maybe getting a striker. There's obviously been some rumors of some guys they may be interested in. But you got to kind of weed through them and see which ones are legit and not legit.
Well, and there's a couple other things at work here. I think with Nascimento, I don't know that he ever really fully adjusted to MLS. The style of play, the travel, it's very physical. It's a different kind of league than he's used to. So, that may be part of it too. And that's not a knock on him. He's a young player. He's going through new things, away from home for the first time. So you would expect some of those growing pains. Gabriel Peck went through it too. But another thing, when you're talking about recruiting players, and maybe if you're you're saying, okay, look, we're going to get Riqui Puig back, so we have to keep this contract open. Maybe it's a designated player spot, but maybe it's a 1-year deal. Hey, you know what? The World Cup's coming here next year. It's going to be in LA. It's going to be in the United States. If you're a player, a good player, maybe even a named player, on the bubble of your national team, which is qualified for the World Cup, and I don't know, I haven't done the research to come up with the players that this description might fit, but what could be worse than there could be a lot of things worse than coming to play in the United States for 6 months ahead of the World Cup, get used to the weather, get used to the time zone, play every day, where maybe on your club team in Europe or South America, maybe you're not playing every game. We saw Son came to LAFC and he made the point of, I'm coming to get ready for the World Cup. We had Gareth Bale at LAFC in 2022. I came to get ready for the World Cup. That's a very attractive message the Galaxy could use if they wanted to go to a player and say, look, come on, play a season. We really don't have the salary and roster spot for you to play a couple seasons, but come on over, get acclimated for the World Cup, score a bunch of goals for us, and let's see what happens after that.
No, I definitely agree. I think it's an attractive offer, especially when you're talking about, even sometimes when they have a bad season, it kind of feels like their success and the history of the club is so far away, but they are still the LA Galaxy. And that kind of leads me into my last question for you to see what you think about this. The Galaxy obviously had the worst season in the club history. LAFC just signed Son Heung-min, who has a global appeal. He's been balling out for the LAFC. They look like they're going to be a serious contender again in 2026. And, the LA Galaxy have a little flexibility with maybe adding someone. But Greg Vanney, you mentioned earlier, he's missed the playoffs 3 of the 5 seasons he's been in charge with the LA Galaxy. Will Kuntz did win MLS Cup his first year, but his second year was the worst in club history. It's about what you've done for me lately. We talked about that earlier, Kevin. I mean, how hot are these guys' seats? I mean, what do they have to do in 2026 to almost guarantee neither of them get sacked?
Well, it's a really interesting dynamic. And you mentioned LAFC. Remember, they're going to have a new coach this year, Mark Dos Santos. And his only stint as an MLS manager, he had a losing record, pretty dismal record in Vancouver. So we'll see what happens with him at LAFC. But Greg Vanney, he was an original Galaxy player. He was on the first team, hoisted the first cups they won, played for the U.S. national team at the time in the World Cup. When he came back from Toronto, where he was hugely successful, won the only treble in MLS history, when he came back from Toronto, he was brought back because the Galaxy said, you need to rekindle and rebuild that Galaxy tradition and culture that was here that you helped build at the start. It got away from us. They had a dismal series of seasons, and Greg Vanney was coming back to build that. He's been here 5 years and has a losing record overall. Last year they started the season off with going winless in 16 games. During that losing streak, or not losing streak, but during that winless streak, he signed a 3-year extension that made him one of the richest managers in MLS history. And nothing against Greg Vanney. I like Greg Vanney. I love talking soccer to Greg Vanney. He clearly knows what he's doing. I think he's been let down by some personnel decisions and some poor play on the part of his players. I don't think you can point the finger right at Greg Vanney, but the old adage is you can't fire, the entire roster. You have one manager and 30 players. You can't fire 30 players. I just rack my brain thinking any other first division league in the world where a guy is 16 games without a win and you give him a rich 3-year contract. The Galaxy, had to pay off Kurt Onalfo for a couple of seasons. Then they had to pay off Ziggy Schmidt. At one point, Onalfo and Ziggy Schmidt were both getting money not to coach the team. Then Guillermo Barros-Scalota, they fired him. He got money. So they paid 3 of their last 4 managers not to manage the team. And I think that kind of has not gone over well with ownership, with Phil Anschutz. So Greg Vanney signing that contract, it was a head scratcher for a lot of us, but for Greg Vanney, it was a great deal because I think he's going to get the second and third and fourth opportunities. Will Kuntz is in a little bit of a different situation. I'm not quite sure how rich his contract is, but you can kind of see the possibility. I'm not saying this is happening yet, but there seems to be whispers every once in a while that if things do go south, are those guys going to start pointing their fingers at each other? Like I'm trying to win with the guys in the field and I'm not getting the guys I want. And then I gave you the guys you wanted, you asked for, I signed the best players I could. I do know that the front office, on the player acquisition side, they are working really hard. We talked to them on Christmas Eve and they were still there in the office on Christmas Eve. They're turning over every rock, trying to find any solution to the problems they have. But yeah, I mean, Will Kuntz had a great first full season and took that team to the MLS Cup final, made some amazing signings and some moves. Last season didn't go well. I think it's a bigger bounce back season for him because he doesn't have the track record that Greg Vanney has. And Will Kuntz now, with Riqui out, having signed these 2 defenders, now he's up against the salary crunch. and he has two positions, key positions. He needs to have an attacking midfielder, and he needs to sign a striker, and he's running out of time to do it because camp opens in 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I thought about this a lot too. Obviously, you're a global soccer fan as well. I know you're a Manchester City fan, correct?
I am, even though I'm
Yeah,
wearing a Roma shirt
and you're
today.
wearing a Roma. Yeah, you're trying to throw people off the trail with that one. But you know as well as I do, any other league in the world, if you had 3 losing seasons, it's kind of hard to compare directly because they don't have playoffs. But if they had 3 poor seasons of a 5-year tenure, you would never even get a second chance to have a bad season. One bad season would get most coaches at the status of a club like the Galaxy equivalent, in Europe, they'd be sacked. They would be sacked. I mean, that's just how. I mean, they would have been damn near relegated if they were in Europe with their points they had this year. I don't know exactly if they were the third worst team. They were very close. They would have been relegated if there's pro rel in MLS. Any other coach would have got fired, no matter if it was Pep Guardiola. If Manchester City got relegated, they would be fired. This guy gets an extension, like you said. He gets a 3-year extension. He's probably the highest paid coach in MLS. They don't release those numbers, but I would assume he's probably damn near at the top of being the highest paid coach in the league. And I actually did a video talking about this recently, but the standards in MLS are just so much lower. And that's why I'm hoping that if the Galaxy, because the status they are as a club, if they fail to make the playoffs in 2026, everyone should be fired, Kevin. Everyone should be fired.
Well, I think one thing, people talk a lot about whether, by the way, the contract, my understanding is the contract, I don't know the figures, but the contract is the richest for an MLS manager who does not have other duties. Like, some guys are GMs and managers. So that's where his salary is. We talk about the U.S. not having a soccer culture, and this is where that manifests itself. You're right. Any other first division league in the world, manager doesn't survive that, doesn't survive losing 3 out of 5 seasons. They move on. In the U.S., you look at situations where baseball team, well, they're going through a rebuilding phase and they stick with the manager. And football team, well, we haven't given him a shot yet. He needs to build his own. He needs to get his own offensive coordinator in here. There's a lot more patience. Guys get a lot longer time to sort of put their philosophy in place. And that's kind of the American system. And, even though people, wonder what's going on with Greg Vanney, why is he still here? I think Phil Anschutz and the front office look at it and said, this guy really knows his soccer, which he does. He's going to figure this out, which he may do. He did in 2024. We're going to give him some extra time. Where in Europe, of course, that wouldn't happen. And I think that's part of the American sports culture. By the way, Greg Vanney did say after that they went 16 games without a win. Then they finally won a game, and they finished the season over the last 18 games. They actually did pretty well. They went 7, 6, and 5 over the last 18 games. That's 26 points. Extrapolate that out over a full season, and they have 49 points, and they probably make the playoffs. That's what Greg Vanney has said going into this year. Look, we were without Riqui. And by the way, the Riqui Puig thing, I can't overemphasize how much the Galaxy used that, not as an excuse, but we lost the greatest player in the league. We lost the best player on our team. How are we supposed to win without that? We're just trying to muddle through and get to the end of the season, and then maybe he'll come back. Everything was predicated on Riqui Puig. The good thing is that black cloud, or that cloud, is not going to be hanging over the team this year. They know they're without him. They know he's not coming back. And Greg Vanney is going to point to that finish and say, look, we figured out in the second half of the season how to play without Riqui. And I'm sure he's going to say we're going to carry that over into this season. But I can't imagine there's any Galaxy player that said, yeah, this is a good thing that we lost Riqui. We're okay.
I agree. And I'm going to be paying close attention to the Galaxy in 2026 to see how much, or if they do improve at all. It'd be kind of hard not to improve with as bad as they were in 2025. Kevin, it's always a pleasure. Before I let you go, my friend, can you tell the people where they can find your work at?
Yeah, well, I'm in the LA Times at latimes.com, and on Twitter, Blue Sky, kbaxter11.
Kevin, it's always a pleasure to have you, my friend. Guys, hope you enjoy this episode. We'll see what the Galaxy do in 2026. Until next time, I will see you all soon.
Happy New Year.